Hi guys, Naz here. Today I'm going to be showing you how I patterned my foam armour for Tempest Shadow, as well as how to do fabric covered armour. This is a really easy way to pattern your foam armour. I'm using little pieces of masking tape and I'm just layering them on in the general shape that I want her saddle to be. Once I've worked out the exact shape, I'm going to do a couple of layers to make sure that it's nice and thick and it doesn't peel apart when I peel it off her back, but I'm going to go in with a little Sharpie marker and I'm just going to neatly draw the exact outline of that saddle piece, as well as any detail lines that I want on there as well. Once I've scanned my pattern pieces and drawn them onto paper, I'm going to transfer them onto some thin EVA foam with a silver Sharpie, making sure to add any sort of registration marks that will make sure that all these pieces line up with each other. Once that's cut out, we're going to use some contact adhesive to stick them all together, and that will form that nice shape that contours to Tempest Shadow's back. You can typically buy contact cement at your local hardware store. In Australia I buy mine from Bunnings Warehouse, but you can probably buy yours from the equivalent in the United States. It would be called barge cement, is one that I've commonly seen. In Australia we have this Seeker brand. But essentially all you need to do is you need to apply this sticky glue to the edges that you want glued together. And the thing with contact cement is that you have to let it dry first, and then once it's dry you can press the two layers that have the glue against each other, and that is not going to come apart unless you rip very, very hard. You can see here that I'm lining my pieces up, making sure that the seam is nice and smooth, sort of smudging it together with my fingers, and that has an entire saddle put together. You want to make sure that you follow the safety directions of your particular contact cement. It is quite smelly, so make sure you're working in a well ventilated area, and it is extremely tacky, so be careful not to accidentally stick it before you are ready. I'm just testing the fit on Tempest's back. I'm really happy with that. It fits nicely contoured to her like a little saddle. So the next step is going to be patterning sort of the neck cuff that goes around, and essentially you can put whatever you need to put underneath this tape to get it to form the shape that you want. I think I just got a piece of foam or a piece of felt or something like that, and use that to sort of push the tape backwards at that nice angle that Tempest's neck collar has. And I'm just checking it again and drawing in the lines, the outline of where I want it to be. You can also draw a seam down the middle, and any straight seams you can flip over and make into one singular piece. I'm just peeling it off here and just checking the fit, and then I'm going to do the same thing as I did before, which is scan this, and I'm going to put that onto the EVA foam and glue those back seams together, as you can see here, and that'll make the neck collar in the exact shape that we want. And then I'll go ahead and test fit it against Tempest to make sure that it's exactly what I would like. Repeated the same process I did before by adding glue to the layers that I want glued together, waiting for it to dry, and then I'm going to glue these neck collars to the saddle piece. You can see that it meets at a nice angle because we had the tape matching exactly with the seam along the saddle when we created the pattern. So I'm just using pins to hold this against her back while I continue the patterning process. The next part I'm going to do is the strap that comes around her neck. So I'm going to follow the exact same process as I did before, using references and just putting that masking tape all around her neck, and then drawing the outline and then laying it flat to get the final pattern piece. You can see here how the neck piece came out, very simple. This is just a single piece that wraps all the way around. I didn't add any seams. You want to try and avoid adding seams where possible because it's going to make your armour look smoother and more uniform. So I probably could have added a little dart at the front to make a contour to her chest a tiny bit more, but I didn't want to have this big sort of garish dart right in the middle that would detract from the metallic, clean look of the armour. I trialled cutting some sort of lines into her saddle piece to match her reference, but I wasn't really happy with how that looked, so I decided to go with this layered effect for the back plates on her saddle piece. So all I did was I covered this saddle piece in tape, and then I drew on where I wanted those plates to be, making sure that they overlapped where need be. And here I'm just using that contact adhesive on both pieces that I want to stick together and sticking those on one at a time, starting at the back and working to the front as those sort of shell pieces overlap each other. Here I am just with my rotary tool, my Dremel, and I'm just going with a circular sanding bit, and I'm just taking off any excess material. When you're cutting the EVO foam with just plain scissors, you can get some not so ideal cuts, so I'm just neatening everything out. You could potentially cut it with a blade, but I just think it's easier to cut it with scissors and then go in and smooth it all out with the rotary sander on the Dremel. And I'm just taking off any excess material that I don't think needs to be there, as well as excess glue that I might have accidentally put a little bit too much on. Okay, so I've got a little image of Tempest here, and I'm going to be patterning her side pattern plates. These are a little bit more complicated than the patterning that we just did with the tape, so I'm going to do this digitally, but it's quite simple once you get the hang of it. So I'm going to just reduce the opacity down a little bit so that we can draw on top of this image, and I'm going to make a new layer on top. Now both of her plates, the front one and the back one, are sort of these geometric shapes that have been skewed a bit to make them, I guess, look like they're wrapping around her body or a bit more stylistic. All I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one plate, so we'll pick the top plate of this shoulder piece here and sort of draw the centre line, and then we're going to draw one side of it. I picked the side that sort of looks more like it's facing us and less wrapped around in perspective. And I'm just going to draw that line there, copy it, rotate it, flip it horizontal, and then I'm going to just marry up those that middle seam so that we have a nice symmetrical piece. And we merge those layers together. You can definitely do this by tracing over a drawing with paper. I'm just going to squish that a bit more horizontally so it looks kind of like what I think this whole piece would look like if it wasn't skewed. And to make the next piece of the plate, I'm just going to make a new layer, making sure that the top piece is the same as this one here. And you can see that it's kind of like a skewed rectangle, so I'm just going to mentally sort of make it how I think it would be if it wasn't skewed. Or you can use the same technique as I did before by drawing the centre line, flipping, and then sort of making that marry up. And then all we want for the side pieces is to match this seam, and then we sort of judge how that's going to be. I think if it wasn't wrapped around her body, it would look something like this, and that would be flipped around like this for the other side. And that's essentially how I patterned the front piece. This piece here actually doesn't have any sort of seam, so I'll get rid of that to avoid any confusion, but you would just cut all these pieces out of EVA foam and contact cement them together. Now we'll do the back. So this one's a bit more warped in a funny shape, but I'll repeat the process, picking the side that I think closely resembles the geometry, copying that half, flipping it horizontally, and marrying it back up in the middle. This one, as I mentioned, is a bit more skewed than the front piece, but it's just up to your own artistic interpretation. Now, there is no line here, but when I patterned it, I put a seam here because I feel like this rounds out a bit. It's not just a flat sheet, it curves this way and this way. So I'm just going to do this. And rather than making this a single piece like I did with the top, I'm going to just add a little bit of curvature to this seam so that when I glue this piece with another piece that matches, that curvature is going to force that to bow out at the front a little bit. And to make our last piece, all we're going to do is sort of make a triangle that fits in there, or not a triangle, sort of a warped rectangle. And we're going to have two of those. One of them is going to go on the other side. Now, when I did these patterns, I tested them out to see if they fit together, and I liked the shape. I did have to change the angle on some of them. I had to make some bits a little bit wider, some bits I needed to take some material off. But yeah, that's essentially how I patterned those side pieces. This little bit down here, all I did was make sort of like a rectangle and just added a little bow down the bottom, and that was just a straight piece of foam, not sort of glued with any seams. So now that we've finished patterning all our foam pieces, we're going to have a go at covering our foam in spandex. This is what I did for my Element of Harmony that I made for Rainbow Dash. You can use pretty much any kind of 4-way stretch spandex. I'm just using gold because that's what I have on hand. I found out the hard way with Tempest that you can't use this for fabric, stretch fabric that has any sort of holes in it or is a bit thin. The fabric I was going to use for Tempest Armour was a bit too thin and the glue unfortunately ran through. So this technique is definitely good for different colours of spandex, there's just whole rainbows of spandex you can find online. So to attach the spandex to our foam pieces, all we're going to do is brush on a thin layer of our contact adhesive to the foam, and we're going to do the same to the back sides of the spandex. It's a little bit tricky because the spandex wants to stretch and snag on everything, so lay it on a piece of paper and just do your best to try and cover the entire thing with that contact adhesive. Once you've let that dry and it's tacky but not wet, you can push your pieces down onto the spandex and then sort of press the spandex into them to make sure that it conforms nicely. You might need to stretch it a fair bit for your more complex geometric shapes. Some pieces you might need to break up into multiple pieces and then glue them back together, just because you can't really do complex twists and turns with this kind of material. Otherwise you're going to get sort of nips and tucks and overlays. We don't want to worry about how the spandex is going to curve around our edges just yet. I'm going to do that last. You can see here I'm just pulling and pinching and trying to smooth that spandex onto our saddle piece. Now, the neater job you do with your glue and the less sort of globs you leave on it, the smoother it's going to be. You can also use your fingernail or a little tool to push the spandex into sort of any recessed details, like these lines I have on the plates here. After that's dried, you want to cut out all the excess material and just leave enough to wrap around your sides. Just be careful you don't cut away too much because it's not good to have that foam peeking around the sides. Here I've got another throwaway brush and I'm just brushing around the edges, and once that's dried I'm repeating the process as I did before, wrapping the spandex against the glued sides. You want to cut away any corners, any excess in the corners, kind of like if you're wrapping a Christmas present, just so that your spandex isn't going to be touching other spandex when you press it back onto the sides of the foam. And here's what our pieces look like when they're fully covered. It's a really nice way to get very broad areas covered in sort of that metallic spandex. You can make things look like they're metal, you can make things look like gems. It's just a really good technique to cover broad areas. You can't really do extremely complex shapes, but if you're going to do those, you can always sew and make sort of a sleeve that will fold over your foam piece using the exact same pattern. You can see that underneath the foam is pretty unsightly. You want to make sure that it's glued down so you don't see these underneath foam pieces from the top, but generally with your armour it's going to be pressed against your body anyway. Be careful when you're pushing your spandex down not to cut it with your fingernails because it can be a little bit delicate. You can scratch some of the pigment off the top of the spandex. But I hope you guys learned a fair bit from this tutorial on making foam armour and covering it with spandex. And if you have any suggestions for future tutorials, send me a private message on Patreon. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!